I'm Deborah, 28 years old, and tonight my parents will finally understand what prison taught me. 7 years ago, they stood in that courtroom, tears streaming down their faces as they testified against their own daughter. My mother's voice cracked when she told the judge about the missing money. My father couldn't even look at me. Tonight, as I watch them through their living room window hosting another one of their charity dinners, they have no idea their perfect world is about to crumble. Before we dive into this shocking story of betrayal and justice, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Are you someone who believes in second chances? Have you ever been wrongly accused? Please hit that like button if you believe karma always finds its way, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories of redemption. Trust me, what happens next will leave you questioning everything about family loyalty. 7 years ago, I was 21 and working as the bookkeeper for my family's construction business, Mitchell Construction. My parents had built it from nothing into a multi-million-dollar empire, and I was proud to be part of their legacy. That pride shattered the day I discovered something was terribly wrong with our accounts. It started innocently enough on a Thursday afternoon. I was reconciling the monthly statements when I noticed discrepancies in several transactions. Money was being moved between accounts in patterns that made no sense. The deeper I dug, the more alarmed I became. Nearly $500,000 had vanished through a maze of false invoices and phantom vendor payments. My hands shook as I printed out the evidence. My first instinct was to call my parents, but they were in Hawaii celebrating their 30th anniversary. They'd specifically asked not to be disturbed unless it was an emergency. I debated whether this qualified, ultimately deciding to wait one more day to gather more evidence. That decision destroyed my life. The next morning, my older brother Jake walked into my office. Jake had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. While I worked behind the scenes, keeping the books, he was the face of the company, charming clients and closing deals. Working hard or hardly working, little sister? He asked, his trademark smile not quite reaching his eyes. He never came to my office. Something felt wrong immediately. Just going through some accounts, I replied carefully. Actually, I'm glad you're here. I found something strange in the books. His expression shifted subtly. Oh, what kind of strange? Before I could answer, he moved behind my desk, leaning over my shoulder to look at my computer screen. His cologne was overwhelming, and I instinctively minimized the spreadsheet I'd been working on. I need to show you and Mom and Dad together, I said. It's serious, Jake. Money is missing. He straightened up, and for just a moment I saw something dark flash across his face. Then the smile returned. Missing money. That's quite an accusation, Deb. You sure you're reading those numbers right? The condescension in his voice made my skin crawl. I've been doing this job for 3 years. I know what I'm looking at. Well, let me take a look. Maybe fresh eyes will help. He practically pushed me out of my chair, his fingers flying across the keyboard. I protested, but he waved me off. Just grabbing some files for a meeting. You know how Dad gets when I'm late. He was at my computer for less than 2 minutes, but something felt deeply wrong about the entire interaction. After he left, I immediately went back to my work, but several files had been accessed. My stomach dropped when I realized he'd opened folders I hadn't touched in months. That weekend, our parents returned from vacation early. I was at my apartment when my phone rang. It was my mother, and she was crying. Deborah, you need to come to the house right now, she said, her voice thick with tears. Mom, what's wrong? Is someone hurt? Just come, now. The drive to my parents' house felt like a funeral procession. When I arrived, I found them in the living room with Jake and Stanley Morrison, my father's business partner of 15 years. The atmosphere was suffocating. My father stood by the fireplace, his face carved from stone. My mother sat on the couch, clutching a tissue box. Jake lounged in the armchair like he owned the place, while Stanley stood near the window, arms crossed. Sit down, Deborah, my father commanded. I'd never heard that tone directed at me before. What's going on? You tell us, he said, throwing a folder on the coffee table. Papers spilled out, bank statements, emails, transaction records. My heart stopped when I recognized some of them as the documents I'd been reviewing, but others were completely foreign to me. I don't understand. I began reaching for the papers. Don't touch them, my mother shrieked. Haven't you done enough? Jake leaned forward, his voice dripping with fake concern. Deb, we know about the money. We found everything on your computer. The secret accounts, the falsified invoices, all of it. The room spun. What secret accounts? I was trying to tell you about missing money, but someone else. Stop lying. My father's roar silenced me. Jake showed us everything. Your computer password, the hidden folders, the offshore account in the Caymans with your name on it. That's impossible. I don't have any offshore accounts. Someone is setting me up. I looked desperately at each face in the room. Jake, tell them about yesterday. I was trying to show you the discrepancies. Jake shook his head sadly. Deb, I came to your office because Stanley noticed irregularities. You acted so strange, wouldn't let me see your screen. It all makes sense now. Stanley stepped forward. I've been monitoring unusual activity for weeks. It all traced back to your login credentials, Deborah. When Jake accessed your computer with the password you gave him months ago for that software update, we found everything. I never gave him my password. But even as I said it, I remembered Jake asking to use my computer several months back when his crashed. He'd watched me type it in. We also found this, my mother said, pulling out a designer handbag I'd never seen before. In your apartment. The receipt shows it was purchased with company funds. You went through my apartment. We had to know the truth, she whispered. The building manager let us in. We found 3 more bags, jewelry, electronics. All traced back to the missing money. My mind raced. Someone had planted those items. The only people with access to my apartment were my parents, who had a spare key for emergencies, and I looked at Jake, and for just a second his mask slipped. I saw triumph in his eyes. It's Jake, I said quietly. He's the one stealing. He planted all of this. The slap came from nowhere. My mother had never hit me before, but her palm connected with my cheek with enough force to knock me back. How dare you blame your brother for your crimes, she hissed. He's the one who discovered this. He's trying to save our company while you destroy it. My father pulled her back, but his eyes were just as cold. We've already spoken to Connor, he said, referring to his best friend and our family lawyer. He agrees that pressing charges is the only way to protect the company and teach you accountability. You're going to have me arrested. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm your daughter. Our daughter wouldn't steal from us, my mother said. Our daughter wouldn't betray everything we've built. Jake stood, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Maybe this is for the best. Prison might give her time to reflect on her choices. Prison, I shot to my feet. You're talking about sending me to prison. I didn't do this. Run a real investigation. Check the security footage, the login times, anything. The evidence is overwhelming, Stanley said. Your father and I have to think about our employees, our contracts. If this gets out without us taking action, we could lose everything. So you're throwing me under the bus to save face? My father's jaw clenched. You threw yourself under the bus when you stole from your own family. I spent the next 2 hours trying to convince them, showing them my own findings about the missing money. But every piece of evidence I presented Jake had an explanation for. He'd prepared for this, I realized. Every document I'd found had been altered to point back to me. Every trail I'd followed had been carefully constructed to lead to my doorstep. When the police arrived, I was sitting in the same spot where I'd opened Christmas presents just months before. My mother couldn't watch as they handcuffed me. My father stood stoic, the businessman protecting his assets. The last thing I saw before they put me in the patrol car was Jake hugging our mother, whispering words of comfort while his eyes met mine through the window. He winked. The courtroom was packed the day my trial began. Word had spread quickly through our affluent community that William and Margaret Mitchell's daughter had embezzled from the family business. The scandal was too juicy for the gossip mongers to resist. I sat at the defendant's table in a borrowed suit, my public defender shuffling papers nervously beside me. James Crawford was fresh out of law school, overwhelmed by his caseload, and clearly intimidated by the prosecution's team of 3 seasoned attorneys, led by our family lawyer, Connor Whitman. Connor had bounced me on his knee as a child. He'd attended every birthday party, every graduation. Now he looked at me like I was a stranger, a criminal who deserved no mercy. "The state calls Margaret Mitchell to the stand," the prosecutor announced. My mother walked to the witness box in her best black dress as if she were attending my funeral. In a way, she was. She'd already buried the daughter she thought she knew. "Mrs. Mitchell." Connor began gently. "I know this is difficult. Can you tell the court about discovering your daughter's theft?" My mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "We trusted her completely. She had full access to our accounts, our passwords, everything. We never imagined—" Her voice broke. "Take your time," the judge said kindly. Judge Harrison had known my family for years. His country club membership had been sponsored by my father. She was always so good with numbers. My mother continued. "Too good, it seems. She knew exactly how to hide what she was doing. If Jake hadn't noticed the discrepancies—" "Objection," Crawford said weakly. "Hearsay." "Overruled," Judge Harrison replied without even looking at him. My mother spent an hour on the stand painting a picture of a daughter who'd become increasingly distant, secretive, materialistic. She talked about finding the expensive items in my apartment, about my supposed complaints about not being paid enough, about how I'd seemed jealous of Jake's position in the company. None of it was true. I'd never complained about my salary. I'd never been materialistic. The distance she described was her own creation, as she'd always favored Jake. But in her mind, she'd already rewritten history to support the narrative she needed to believe. "Do you think prison is appropriate for your daughter?" Connor asked finally. My mother looked directly at me for the first time since entering the courtroom. "Sometimes we have to let our children face the consequences of their actions. It's the hardest kind of love, but it's still love," the gallery murmured appreciatively. What a brave woman, they thought, choosing justice over maternal instinct. My father's testimony was worse. William Mitchell commanded respect in any room he entered, and the courtroom was no exception. He spoke with the authority of a man who'd built an empire from nothing, who understood the value of hard work and honest dealing. "I gave her everything," he said, his voice steady where my mother's had wavered. "Education, opportunity, trust. She threw it all away for what designer handbags, a lifestyle she hadn't earned." "What evidence convinced you of her guilt?" the prosecutor asked. "The numbers don't lie," my father replied. Every forensic accountant we hired came to the same conclusion. The theft occurred using her access codes during her working hours, following patterns only she would know. Jake found emails on her computer discussing offshore accounts. Stanley traced payments to vendors that didn't exist, all authorized by Deborah. Crawford tried to cross-examine, but my father shut down every question with the confidence of a man who knew he was right. When Crawford suggested Jake might have had access to my passwords, my father's face darkened. "My son discovered this crime at great personal cost," he said coldly. "Jake loved his sister. Finding out what she'd done nearly destroyed him. To suggest he orchestrated this is beneath contempt." Jake's performance on the stand was Oscar-worthy. He wore a simple gray suit, nothing flashy, and his voice caught at all the right moments as he described discovering my supposed crime. "I couldn't believe it at first," he said, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I kept thinking there had to be an explanation. Deb was my little sister. I taught her to ride a bike, helped her with homework. Finding those files on her computer was the worst day of my life." "Can you describe what you found?" Connor prompted. Jake pulled out a handkerchief, a nice touch. Folders hidden deep in her system. Spreadsheets tracking transfers to accounts I'd never seen. Emails to someone named Phoenix about moving money offshore. When I confronted her, she acted so strange, wouldn't let me see what she was working on. "Did you want to report your sister?" "God, no," Jake said, and his voice cracked perfectly. "I begged Mom and Dad to handle it privately, but they said we had obligations to our employees, our clients. They were right, but it didn't make it easier. The character witnesses were a parade of my former life, testifying against me. Melissa Chen, my best friend since middle school, told the court I'd become secretive and withdrawn. She mentioned conversations we'd never had about feeling unappreciated at work. Did she ever express resentment toward her family? The prosecutor asked. Melissa hesitated just long enough to seem reluctant. She once said Jake got all the glory while she did all the work. I thought she was just venting. I wanted to scream. I had said that once after Jake had taken credit for a contract I'd helped secure. But Melissa made it sound like I was consumed with jealousy. Ryan Morse, my boyfriend of 2 years, didn't even look at me during his testimony. He'd disappeared the day after my arrest, wouldn't return my calls from jail. Now I understood why. She liked nice things, he told the court. Always wanted to go to expensive restaurants, take trips we couldn't afford. I thought she was just dreaming big, but now I wonder if she was already spending money that wasn't hers. This from the man who'd never once paid for dinner, who'd borrowed money from me countless times and never paid it back. But the jury didn't know that. They saw a clean-cut young man sadly describing his materialistic girlfriend. The only person who tried to help was Aunt Ruth, my mother's younger sister. She testified that I'd always been responsible, honest, trustworthy. She questioned the evidence, suggested someone else might be involved. Is it possible you're biased because Deborah is your niece? Connor asked on cross-examination. Is it possible you're all biased because you've already decided she's guilty? Ruth shot back. Judge Harrison warned her about her attitude. The jury seemed to dismiss her testimony as family loyalty clouding judgment. By the time the prosecution rested, they'd painted me as a greedy, entitled daughter who'd betrayed her generous parents for designer goods and a flashy lifestyle. The forensic evidence was damning, even though I knew it had been fabricated. Every expert who testified confirmed that the theft could only have been committed by someone with my exact access and knowledge. Crawford did his best in my defense, but what could he do? He had no resources for independent forensic analysis. The witnesses he called were character references who seemed weak compared to the parade of family and friends who'd testified against me. When he suggested the evidence might have been planted, the prosecution made him look like he was grasping at straws. My own testimony was a disaster. I tried to explain about finding the discrepancies about Jake's suspicious behavior about the planted evidence. But Connor twisted everything I said. So you admit you were investigating missing money? He asked. Yes, but I was trying to find out who... And you admit your brother found evidence on your computer? It was planted there. Evidence that forensic experts confirm could only have been created by someone with your access. Jake knew my password. He could have. So you're saying your brother, who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, orchestrated an elaborate frame-up instead of simply accepting that you got caught? The jury looked skeptical. I sounded exactly like what they expected a criminal blaming everyone but herself. During closing arguments, Connor delivered the final blow. This case isn't just about theft. It's about the ultimate betrayal, a daughter stealing from parents who gave her everything. William and Margaret Mitchell have shown incredible courage in pursuing justice despite their personal pain. They've chosen integrity over family law over love. Deborah Mitchell violated not just criminal statutes, but the sacred trust between parent and child. She deserves no leniency. Crawford's closing was passionate but unfocused. He talked about reasonable doubt, about rushing to judgment, about the possibility of misunderstanding. But he couldn't explain away the evidence, couldn't offer an alternative theory that made sense to 12 people who'd already made up their minds. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours. When they filed back in, not one of them would meet my eyes. On the charge of embezzlement in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. The list went on. Guilty, guilty, guilty. I felt my knees buckle. Crawford steadied me, whispering that we'd appeal, that this wasn't over. But I could barely hear him over the roaring in my ears. Judge Harrison scheduled sentencing for the following week. As court officers prepared to take me back to jail, I turned to look at my family one last time. My mother was sobbing into my father's shoulder. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, every inch the wronged patriarch. But Jake was comforting our mother, playing the devoted son. Over her shoulder, he looked at me and smiled. A week later, Judge Harrison sentenced me to 10 years in federal prison. This court has seen many cases of embezzlement, he said, but rarely one involving such a profound betrayal of familial trust. Ms. Mitchell, you had every advantage in life, yet you chose greed over gratitude. Your parents' courage in bringing this to justice is commendable. I hope you use your time in prison to reflect on your choices and emerge a better person. With good behavior, Crawford told me I could be out in 7 years. 7 years for a crime I didn't commit. 7 years because my family believed a lie. As they led me away in shackles, I heard my mother's wail echo through the courthouse. The sound followed me all the way to the transport van where I sat with other convicted felons heading to federal prison. The woman next to me, convicted of armed robbery, looked at my expensive suit and perfect makeup. "First time?" she asked, not unkindly. I nodded, unable to speak. "What did you do?" "I trusted my family," I whispered. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah, that'll get you every time." The Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California, became my home on a rainy Tuesday in March. The intake process stripped away the last remnants of Deborah Mitchell, replacing her with inmate 47832B. They took my clothes, my dignity, and what little hope I had left. My cellmate was a 45-year-old Mexican-American woman named Carmen Valdez. When I shuffled into our 8x10 concrete box, she looked up from a thick textbook and assessed me with sharp brown eyes. "White collar?" she asked. I nodded, setting my meager belongings on the metal shelf that would hold everything I owned for the next 7 years. "Let me guess," Carmen continued. "Embezzlement? First offense? Family business? How did you know?" She laughed, but not unkindly. "You have that look, like you can't believe this is real. Like any minute someone's going to realize there's been a mistake." "There has been a mistake," I said quietly. "Sure, honey. We're all innocent in here." She must have seen something in my face because her expression softened. "Sit. Tell me about it." Over the next weeks, I poured out my story to Carmen during the endless hours of confinement. She listened without judgment, asking probing questions that made me think about details I'd overlooked. Carmen, I learned, had been a forensic accountant for a major corporation before she discovered her bosses were defrauding investors. When she'd tried to report it, they'd flipped the script and pinned it on her. 5 years into my 12-year sentence, she told me. "Lost my house, my reputation, my kid won't talk to me. But you know what? I didn't lose my brain. And neither will you if you're smart." Carmen became my unlikely mentor. During the day, she worked in the prison library. At night, she taught me advanced forensic accounting techniques that went far beyond what I'd learned in college. "If someone framed you as well as you say," she explained, "they knew enough to fool basic detection. But there's always a trail. Always. You just need to know where to look." She introduced me to her network women who'd lived lives of crime and were surprisingly willing to share their knowledge. There was Letitia Williams doing 15 years for cyber fraud who taught computer classes in the education building. Officially, she helped inmates learn basic computer skills. Unofficially, she taught those she trusted about hacking digital forensics and cryptocurrency. "The thing about hackers," Letitia told me one day, "is we assume everyone else thinks like we do. Your brother was smart, but I bet he made mistakes. Problem is, you need access to find them." Wendy Chen, a master forger serving 8 years, showed me how documents could be altered to fool even experts. "See this," she said, pointing to a practice signature. "Most people think forgery is about copying. It's not. It's about understanding the personality behind the writing. Your brother didn't just forge documents, he forged your personality in them." Jade Morrison, a con artist with 10 years left on her sentence, taught me about human psychology and manipulation. "Your family wanted to believe you were guilty," she explained. "Made it easier to accept the evidence. People see what they want to see. The first year was hell. I cried myself to sleep every night, wrote letters to my parents that came back, unopened, contemplated ways to end the pain. I might have succeeded if not for Carmen, who found me with a sharpened toothbrush one night and slapped it out of my hand. "You think killing yourself proves your innocence?" she demanded. "It just proves they won. You want to die or you want justice? I want my life back, I sobbed. That life is gone, Mija, but you can build a better one. First, though, you need to get angry. Then you need to get smart. Then you need to get even. So I got angry. I channeled my rage into education, spending every free hour in the library studying law, accounting, computer systems. I worked in the prison's administrative office, earning respect from guards and inmates alike for my intelligence and work ethic. I tutored other inmates for their GEDs, helped them with legal paperwork, became someone they could trust. The women inside taught me more than any university could. They showed me how the world really worked, how systems could be manipulated, how people could be read and influenced. They taught me to be hard when necessary, strategic always, and to never show weakness to those who would exploit it. Aunt Ruth was my only connection to the outside world. She visited once a month, driving 3 hours each way. Through her, I learned how my family's life had continued without me. Jake runs the company now, she told me during one visit. Expanded into government contracts. They bought a new house, 10,000 square feet in Marin County. How's Mom? Ruth's face tightened. She doesn't talk about you. It's like you never existed. No photos, no mentions. Jake and his wife had a baby. Named him William after your father. He's married. Victoria Harrison, the judge's daughter. Beautiful wedding last year. I wasn't invited after I testified for you. The judge's daughter. Of course. Keep it all in the family, ensure everyone stays quiet. I filed that information away with everything else I was learning. There's something else, Ruth said, lowering her voice. Stanley Morrison died 6 months ago. Car accident, they said. Drove off a cliff on Highway 1. My blood ran cold. Stanley had been Jake's accomplice, I was sure of it. Now, he was conveniently dead. Single car accident, I asked. In perfect weather. No skid marks. We looked at each other, understanding passing between us. Jake was cleaning house, removing loose ends. Stanley must have become a liability. By year 3, I'd transformed completely. The soft, trusting girl who'd entered prison was gone. In her place was someone harder, smarter, infinitely more dangerous. I'd earned my GED in accounting, was working on a law degree through correspondence courses, and had built a network of contacts both inside and outside prison walls. Letitia had taught me to think like a hacker. Your brother's not as smart as he thinks, she said. Men like him always leave digital footprints. He's probably still using variations of the same passwords, same hidden accounts. When you get out, you'll know where to look. Carmen pushed me to think bigger. You don't just want to prove your innocence, she said. You want to destroy everyone who destroyed you. That takes planning. I spent 2 years creating detailed plans. Through Ruth, I tracked my family's movements, their businesses, their associations. Jake had brought in a new partner, Marcus Webb, to replace Stanley. My father was having health issues, spending more time at the country club and less at the office. My mother had discovered prescription pills, probably the only way she could live with what she'd done. Your dad's been seen with his secretary a lot, Ruth mentioned during one visit. Young woman about 25, Brooke something. Another piece of information filed away. Everyone had secrets. Everyone had weaknesses. In year 5, I met Sarah Chen in the library. She was doing 20 years for running a Ponzi scheme that had bilked investors out of millions. She was also brilliant, ruthless, and exactly what I needed. Revenge is like a good con, she told me. It requires patience, planning, and perfect timing. You can't just expose them. You need to destroy them the same way they destroyed you, publicly, completely, irrevocably. She helped me refine my plans, pointing out flaws and possibilities I'd missed. Together with Carmen and Letitia, we created a blueprint for destruction that would have made Machiavelli proud. I also learned to physically defend myself. Prison has a hierarchy, and being weak makes you a target. A woman named Big Donna, doing life for killing her abusive husband, took me under her wing. You're too small to win with strength, she said. So you win with speed and smarts. Hit first, hit hard, hit where it hurts. I only had to prove myself once. A woman tried to shake me down for commissary money. I broke her nose and 2 fingers before the guards pulled us apart. I got 30 days in solitary, but when I came out, everyone knew not to mess with the accountant. Solitary gave me time to think, to plan, to remember why I was doing this. In the darkness, I pictured my parents' faces, Jake's smile, the jury that condemned me. I memorized every detail of my plan, refined it, perfected it. Year 6 brought unexpected hope. Carmen was getting released on appeal. A journalist had taken interest in her case, found evidence of prosecutorial misconduct. The night before she left, she pressed a piece of paper into my hand. "My contact information," she said. "When you get out, call me. I'll help however I can." Why, I asked? Because I know what it's like to lose everything to a lie. And because I think you're going to do something spectacular when you get out. Letitia was released a month later, her sentence commuted for good behavior and cooperation with federal authorities on cybercrime cases. She'd turned her skills legitimate, but promised to help when I needed it. "Just remember," she said, "the best revenge is served cold, and digitally. They'll never see it coming." My last year was the hardest and easiest. Hard because I could see the end-taste freedom just out of reach. Easy because I'd become someone who could handle anything. I was no longer the naive girl who'd trusted her family. I was a weapon forged in the fires of betrayal and honed by the best criminal minds in the federal system. I worked out religiously, studied obsessively, and finalized every detail of my plan. Through Ruth, I knew Jake's patterns, my parents' routines, their weaknesses and vulnerabilities. I knew about my father's affair, my mother's addiction, Jake's increasingly risky business dealings. "There's something else," Ruth told me during her final visit before my release. "I overheard Jake and your father arguing last month. Your dad said something about knowing what really happened, and Jake told him it was too late to develop a conscience. So they knew. At some point, my parents had realized the truth, and they'd chosen to stay silent. That made what I was about to do so much easier. The night before my release, I lay in my cell one last time. Carmen had left me her books, including one on forensic accounting with notes in the margins. Inside the back cover, she'd written, "Justice delayed is not justice denied. Make them pay." I intended to. 7 years they'd stolen from me. 7 years of concrete and steel, of dehumanization and survival, of learning to be harder than I'd ever imagined I could be. They'd sent an innocent girl to prison. They had no idea what was coming home. The gates of FCI Dublin opened at 6:43 on a foggy Tuesday morning. I walked out carrying a single bag containing 7 years of legal documents, contact information, and detailed plans. The girl who'd entered this place was dead. In her place stood someone the mirror barely recognized, lean hard, with eyes that had seen too much. Aunt Ruth waited in the parking lot, looking older, but still radiating the warmth that had kept me human through the nightmare. She cried when she saw me. I didn't. I'd forgotten how. "You look different," she said, holding me at arm's length. I am different. She'd rented a small apartment for me in Oakland under the name Sarah Mitchell, complete with documentation Wendy had helped arrange through her outside contacts before my release. The identity was clean-backed by a digital history Letitia had constructed. "Your parents don't know you're out," Ruth said as we drove. "Early release for good behavior wasn't publicized. As far as they know, you have 3 more years." "Good. Tell me everything." Over coffee in my sparse apartment, Ruth filled in details her letters and visits couldn't convey. Mitchell Construction had tripled in size, landing massive government contracts through connections Jake had cultivated. They'd moved into defense, contracting, infrastructure, federal building projects worth hundreds of millions. "Jake's a pillar of the community now," Ruth said bitterly. "Sits on charity boards, golfs with senators. His wife Victoria just had their 2nd child. Your parents dote on the grandchildren they acknowledge." My mother's pill addiction had worsened, though she hid it well in public. My father's affair with his secretary Brooke was an open secret in their social circle. The family attended the same church, the same country club, presented the same perfect facade that had fooled everyone during my trial. "There's more," Ruth said, pulling out a folder. "I've been doing some digging like you asked. Stanley Morrison's widow Helen, she's been asking questions about his death. She hired a private investigator who mysteriously dropped the case after his office was burglarized." Another sign of Jake cleaning up loose ends. I studied the documents Ruth had gathered: bank records, business filings, social media posts. My family had built their castle on the foundation of my destruction. Time to show them how shaky that foundation really was. Carmen and Letitia had given me contact information for people who could help. Within a week, I'd established myself as Sarah Mitchell, freelance forensic accountant, specializing in corporate fraud investigation. My prison education and connections opened doors that would have been closed to Deborah Mitchell. I spent a month conducting surveillance, learning their new routines. My parents lived in a gated community in Marin County, but security was laughably easy to bypass with skills I'd learned inside. I watched them through windows I'd once looked out of as a child, seeing strangers wearing familiar faces. My mother had tea at 2 p.m. sharp, taking her pills with Earl Grey. My father left for the office at 7, though he often detoured to Brooke's apartment. Jake worked late, had dinner with clients, played the successful executive while juggling what I was beginning to understand was a complex web of illegal dealings. Through contacts in the forensic accounting world, I got access to public records that painted an interesting picture. Mitchell Construction's growth coincided with unusually favorable contract terms, competitors mysteriously withdrawing bids, inspectors signing off on projects with obvious issues. Jake had graduated from embezzlement to corruption on a massive scale. The real breakthrough came when I managed to get hired as a consultant for a firm that audited government contracts. Using my Sarah Mitchell identity and carefully crafted credentials, I positioned myself to review Mitchell Construction's files without anyone knowing who I really was. What I found exceeded my wildest expectations. Jake hadn't just stolen the original $500,000 that sent me to prison. Over 7 years, he'd siphoned off nearly $5 million through shell companies, fake vendors, and inflated invoices. But that was just the beginning. The government contracts were dirty, backed by bribes to procurement officials, kickbacks to inspectors, and substandard materials that put people at risk. My brother had built an empire of corruption, and our parents were complicit. Their signatures were on documents, their bank accounts received transfers. Their willful blindness enabled every crime. They'd traded their daughter for dirty money and convinced themselves it was justice. I documented everything meticulously, building an airtight case that would make the evidence against me look like the amateur frame job it was. But I wasn't interested in just sending them to prison. That was too easy, too clean. They needed to lose everything the way I had, piece by piece, in front of everyone who'd admired them. The hardest part was seeing them in person. I'd changed enough that casual acquaintances wouldn't recognize me, my hair different, my body language transformed by years of incarceration. But I needed to test it, needed to know if the people who'd raised me could see through the disguise. I chose the Marin County Children's Hospital Gala, a charity event my parents attended annually. Getting an invitation as Sarah Mitchell, representing a financial services firm interested in charitable giving, was simple enough. I dressed carefully, an elegant black dress that whispered money without screaming it, hairstyled differently than I'd ever worn it before. The country club ballroom glittered with wealth and self-importance. I recognized half the faces, people who'd watched me grow up, who'd attended my trial, who'd whispered about poor William and Margaret Mitchell and their criminal daughter. My parents held court near the bar. My father looked older, grayer, but still commanded attention. My mother had maintained her figure through whatever combination of pills and procedures money could buy, but her eyes were glassy, unfocused. They were talking to Jake and Victoria, the golden couple with their perfect life built on my bones. I walked past them to get champagne. My mother's eyes passed over me without a flicker of recognition. My father didn't even glance my way. But Jake's eyes lingered for a moment, something uncertain in his expression. Then Victoria said something, and he turned away, the moment passing. They didn't know me. Their own daughter stood 5 feet away, and I was invisible to them. The pain of it mixed with satisfaction. If they couldn't recognize me, no one could. I spent the evening gathering intelligence, listening to conversations, noting relationships and weaknesses. Jake was expanding again, pursuing a contract for federal courthouse construction worth $200 million. The irony wasn't lost on me. My brother building courthouses with stolen money while I'd been sentenced in one. Commissioner Patricia Huang mentioned concerns about the bidding process. Senator Michael Torres assured her everything was above board, his hand resting too familiarly on her shoulder. Another piece clicked into place. Jake wasn't just bribing officials. He was facilitating their indiscretions, creating leverage to ensure cooperation. Near midnight, I excused myself to use the restroom. The hallway was empty, but as I passed a side door, I heard familiar voices. Jake and Marcus Webb, his business partner, were having a heated discussion. "Stanley's widow is asking questions again," Marcus said. "She hired another investigator." "Then handle it like we handled the last one," Jake replied coldly. "Jake, we can and we will. I've worked too hard to let Stanley's guilt destroy everything. He knew the risks when he got involved." "What about your sister? She gets out in 3 years." Jake laughed an ugly sound. "You think anyone will believe her? She's a convicted felon. Besides, by then we'll be untouchable. The courthouse contract will cement our position. A few more years and we'll have enough judges and politicians in our pocket to bury any investigation." I recorded every word on the phone Letitia had modified for me, one that could capture audio without any visible indication. Evidence was mounting, but I needed more. I needed everything. Over the following weeks, I dove deeper into their operations. Using skills learned in prison, I infiltrated their digital systems, accessed their communications, documented their crimes. My father was more involved than I'd initially thought, actively courting officials, arranging bribes through his country club connections. The affair with Brooke was more than simple infidelity. She was 26, ambitious, and fully aware of the family business's illegal aspects. She was also keeping detailed records insurance against the day they tried to discard her. Smart girl. I made note to approach her when the time was right. My mother's involvement was passive but culpable. She took the money, enjoyed the lifestyle, and swallowed pills to avoid thinking about where it came from. Her charity work, including the Gala for Children's Hospitals, was funded by contracts that cut corners on construction, potentially endangering the very children she claimed to help. But the biggest discovery came from an unexpected source. Helen Morrison, Stanley's widow, had kept her husband's personal files. Through Ruth, I arranged a meeting presenting myself as an investigator looking into government contract fraud. Stanley was scared before he died. Helen told me, hands shaking as she handed over a flash drive. He said Jake Mitchell was getting reckless, that it was only a matter of time before someone looked too closely. He wanted out, but Jake wouldn't let him leave. The files on the drive were damning. Stanley had kept records of every bribe, every falsified document, every corner cut. But buried in the data was something that made my blood run cold. Emails between Jake and Stanley from 7 years ago discussing how to handle the Deborah problem. "She's getting too close," Jake had written. "If she finds the Cayman accounts, she'll trace them back to us." "Then we need to act first," Stanley had replied. "I can alter the digital trails, make it look like she's been stealing for months. You handle the physical evidence." "Already in motion. Bought some items with the company card. We'll plant them this weekend when the parents are away. Once Mom and Dad believe she's guilty, everyone else will fall in line." I stared at the screen, reading the casual discussion of my destruction. They'd planned every detail, predicted every reaction. Stanley had provided the technical expertise while Jake had manipulated our parents, playing the loyal son, discovering his sister's betrayal. "There's one more thing," Helen said quietly. Stanley recorded some conversations. He was paranoid near the end, thought Jake might turn on him. She played an audio file dated 2 months before Stanley's death. His voice, nervous and slightly slurred from drinking, filled the room. "Jake's losing it," Stanley said to someone off recording. "He actually believes Deborah was guilty now. Convinced himself the frame-up was justified because she would have exposed us eventually. The man's rewritten history in his own head." "Then why haven't you gone to the police?" the other voice asked. with what I helped frame an innocent woman. I'm as guilty as he is. Besides, Jake's got connections now. Judges, cops, politicians. He owns half the city council. Going against him is suicide. 2 months later, Stanley drove off a cliff. I copied everything, building my arsenal of evidence. But raw data wasn't enough. I needed to position everyone perfectly, create a scenario where all their crimes would be exposed simultaneously, where they'd have no escape routes, no way to buy or threaten their way out. The plan that had sustained me through 7 years of imprisonment began to take final shape. I would use their own methods against them. They'd destroyed me with false evidence, I'd destroy them with truth. They'd turn my family against me, I'd turn their allies against them. They'd taken everything from me in public view, I'd return the favor. But first I needed to get closer. Sarah Mitchell, forensic accountant, needed to become invaluable to Mitchell Construction. I needed to be inside their organization when I brought it down, positioned to ensure nothing survived the collapse. Through the audit firm, I arranged to flag some minor discrepancies in Mitchell Construction's government filings. Nothing major, just enough to suggest they needed better internal controls. When the suggestion reached Jake's desk that they hire an external consultant to clean up their processes, Sarah Mitchell's name was at the top of the list. The interview was scheduled for the following Monday. I'd sit across from my brother, look him in the eyes, and begin the final phase of my plan. He thought he'd won 7 years ago when he watched them take me away in chains. He was about to learn that some victories are just delayed defeats. Monday arrived with unusual San Francisco clarity, the morning fog burning off early to reveal a crystal blue sky. I dressed carefully in the armor of Sarah Mitchell, a conservative navy suit. Minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a style Deborah would never have worn. The woman in the mirror was a stranger, 7 years of transformation complete. Mitchell Construction's headquarters occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown high-rise. I'd watched from across the street as a teenager while my parents signed the lease for their first real office. Now they owned the entire building. The receptionist, a young woman who'd started after my imprisonment, directed me to the executive floor. My heels clicked against marble that had been installed with stolen money, past artwork purchased with bribes. Every luxury screamed of my family's corruption. Jake's office occupied the corner suite, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city where he'd built his empire on my destruction. He stood when I entered, and for a moment my breath caught. He looked older, harder success sitting on him like expensive cologne. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "No relation, I assume." "None at all," I replied smoothly, accepting his handshake without flinching, though I do get asked frequently. His grip was firm, confident. The hand of a man who'd never faced consequences. That would change. "Please sit. Can I offer you coffee, water?" "I'm fine, thank you." We settled into leather chairs that cost more than most people's cars. Jake studied my resume, though I knew he'd already memorized it. Sarah Mitchell came with impeccable credentials, forensic accounting certification, glowing recommendations from firms I'd worked with since my release, a reputation for discretion. "Your background is impressive," Jake said. "Stanford MBA experience with federal contract compliance, expertise in internal controls. Exactly what we need. I understand you've had some minor issues with documentation on your government contracts." I replied, keeping my voice neutral and professional. Jake's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Minor is the right word. Nothing substantive, just paperwork discrepancies. But in this business, perception matters. We want someone to review our processes, ensure everything is above board." Above board. I wondered if he believed his own lies, or just expected everyone else to. "I'll need full access," I said. "Financial records, communication systems, personnel files. Thorough review requires complete transparency." "Of course, we have nothing to hide." The interview continued for another hour. Jake asked probing questions about my experience, my methods, my discretion. I answered with the confidence of someone who'd spent 7 years preparing for this moment. By the end, I knew he was convinced. Sarah Mitchell was exactly the kind of professional who could clean up any messes without asking uncomfortable questions. "When can you start?" he asked finally. "Monday. I'll need a week to review everything before making recommendations." We shook hands again. As I left his office, I passed a wall of family photos. Jake with our parents at various company milestones. The grandchildren they acknowledged. Company picnics and charity events. I wasn't in a single image. They'd erased me as thoroughly as if I'd never existed. Perfect. It would make what came next easier. I spent the weekend finalizing preparations. Carmen and Letitia were ready to assist remotely. Through prison connections, I'd hired professionals for specific tasks: surveillance, document acquisition, digital infiltration. Every piece had to move perfectly. Monday morning, I arrived at Mitchell Construction as an employee. They gave me a small office on the accounting floor and the access I'd requested. What they didn't know was that Letitia had already been in their systems for weeks, installing backdoors and monitoring programs that would capture every keystroke, every email, every deleted file. I started with legitimate work, reviewing their contract documentation with obsessive attention to detail. I found what I expected: sloppy paperwork hiding systematic fraud. Invoices for materials never delivered, inspection reports for work never performed, change orders padding profits by millions. But I also played the part of the helpful consultant. I identified real issues in their processes, suggested improvements that would genuinely help if they weren't criminals. Jake stopped by daily to check my progress, clearly pleased with his hire. "You're incredibly thorough," he said on Thursday, reviewing a report I'd prepared on their filing systems. "Details matter," I replied. "Small mistakes can have large consequences." He had no idea how true that was. While establishing myself at the company, I began executing the revenge plan's other elements. Using burner phones and encrypted communications, I reached out to Brooke, my father's mistress. "William Mitchell's daughter wants to meet with you," the message read. "She has information about your future with the company." Brooke was smart enough to be intrigued, careful enough to insist on a public meeting. We met at a coffee shop in the Mission District, far from anywhere my family frequented. She recognized me immediately, despite the changes. "You're supposed to be in prison. Good behavior. Who knew?" I stirred my coffee calmly. "I have a proposition for you. I'm not interested in—" "He's never going to leave my mother," I interrupted. "You know that, right? You're 26, beautiful, intelligent. You're wasting your best years on a man who sees you as a convenience." Her face flushed, but she didn't deny it. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "Information. Specifically anything my father might have told you about Jake's business dealings. In return, I'll ensure you're protected when everything collapses." "What collapse?" I smiled. "The one that starts in about 6 weeks. You can go down with them or walk away with enough money to start over. Your choice." Brooke proved as practical as I'd hoped. She'd been documenting my father's indiscretions for insurance, including recorded conversations where he'd drunkenly bragged about bribing city officials. She also confirmed that my parents had discovered Jake's role in framing me 3 years ago, but chose to stay silent to protect the family business. "He said Deborah was probably guilty of something anyway," Brooke told me. "That prison might teach her character." Character. From a man cheating on his wife with a woman younger than his imprisoned daughter. Next, I approached Victoria, Jake's wife. This required more finesse. I couldn't reveal myself, but I could plant seeds of doubt. Through careful social media manipulation and staged encounters, I ensured she, accidentally, discovered evidence of Jake's infidelity with a client's wife. The photos were real, captured by the private investigator I'd hired to follow him. Victoria's reaction was predictable: hurt, anger, and a desire for revenge of her own. When an anonymous message suggested she secure her financial future before confronting him, she listened. When that same source provided evidence of hidden accounts Jake kept from her, she acted. Within 2 weeks, Victoria had quietly transferred significant assets to accounts only she controlled and consulted with the city's best divorce attorney. She also began documenting Jake's business activities, correctly suspecting that a man who'd cheat on his wife would cheat elsewhere too. The government contracts required a different approach. Through my position at Mitchell Construction, I identified which officials were taking bribes. Using information from Stanley's files and my own investigation, I created detailed dossiers on each corrupt individual. Commissioner Patricia Huang received photos of herself accepting envelopes of cash from Jake. Senator Michael Torres got recordings of conversations where he promised contract approvals in exchange for contributions to his campaign. Judge Harrison, who'd sentenced me so harshly, discovered that his financial records were about to be audited, including deposits that matched withdrawals from Mitchell construction accounts. Each package included a simple message: cooperate with the coming investigation, or be destroyed by it. My mother's pill dealer was easier. An anonymous tip to the DEA about a major supplier led them directly to Dr. Robert Crane, who'd been prescribing opioids to wealthy clients for years. When they raided his office, they found Margaret Mitchell's name all over his records. Multiple prescriptions under different names, enough pills to indicate serious dealing rather than personal use. Connor Whitman, the family lawyer who'd prosecuted me, presented a special challenge. He was careful, experienced, paranoid. But he had one weakness: his gambling addiction. Through contacts made in prison, I arranged for him to accumulate substantial debts to people who didn't accept bankruptcy as payment. When Connor received a message offering to clear his debts in exchange for information about Mitchell Construction's illegal activities, he faced an impossible choice: betray his clients or face the consequences of owing money to dangerous people. He chose survival. The plan's final phase required perfect timing. Everything had to converge on a single night for maximum impact. I chose the Marin County Children's Hospital Gala exactly 1 year after I'd attended as Sarah Mitchell. My parents would host the event this year, celebrating Mitchell Construction's donation of a new pediatric wing. A wing built with stolen money, constructed with substandard materials, a monument to their corruption. For weeks, I coordinated with Carmen and Letitia, fine-tuning every detail. Documents would be released to journalists at precisely 9 p.m. Law enforcement would receive evidence packages 30 minutes later. Financial systems would transfer stolen money back to its rightful accounts at 9:45. But first, I had to ensure everyone was in position. I suggested to Jake that he invite potential clients to the gala. It's the perfect setting to showcase Mitchell Construction's community involvement, I told him. He agreed, not knowing I'd ensure those guests included FBI agents posing as executives, journalists hungry for scandal, and every person his family had betrayed. My parents threw themselves into preparations, wanting their signature event to be perfect. They had no idea it would be their last. 3 days before the gala, I made my final moves. Using access I'd gained as Sarah Mitchell, I copied every incriminating document onto secure servers. Letitia's programs captured real-time communications showing Jake trying to cover his tracks, implicating himself further with every keystroke. Commissioner Huang agreed to wear a wire. Senator Torres, terrified of exposure, promised to confess everything. Judge Harrison quietly began cooperating with federal investigators. The rats were fleeing the sinking ship, each one providing evidence that would ensure the Mitchells had no escape. Connor Whitman delivered the final piece, a recorded conversation from 7 years ago, where Jake had bragged about framing me, with my father audible in the background saying, "Just make sure she can't trace it back to us." They'd all known. Every single one of them. The morning of the gala, I performed one last task. Using skills Wendy had taught me in prison, I created a document that would be found in Jake's office safe. A full confession written in his hand detailing every crime. It would be dismissed as a forgery, but not before the media reported on its contents, not before everyone read the truth in what they'd assume were his own words. As evening approached, I prepared carefully. Not as Sarah Mitchell this time, but as myself. I chose a red dress, bold and unmistakable. I styled my hair as I'd worn it in my 20s. I would walk into that ballroom as Deborah Mitchell, and they would all see what their betrayal had created. The 7 years of planning, positioning, and patience were about to pay off. My family had taught me that blood meant nothing when money was involved. Tonight, I would return the lesson with interest. They thought they'd destroyed me. They were about to learn that destruction can be mutual. The Marin County Country Club glowed like a jewel against the darkening sky. Hundreds of San Francisco's elite had gathered to celebrate Mitchell Construction's donation of a new pediatric wing. Unaware they were attending a funeral for the company's reputation. I arrived at 8:30, timing calculated for maximum impact. The valet who took my keys didn't recognize me, but I saw the moment of confusion in his eyes. Something familiar about the woman in the striking red dress, but he couldn't place it. Inside the ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and false charity. A string quartet played Mozart while waiters circulated with champagne and carefully crafted lies. The new wing's architectural model stood on display, a testament to Mitchell Construction's generosity and engineering excellence. If only they knew the foundation was rotten. I took a glass of champagne I wouldn't drink and began circulating. The first person to recognize me was Mrs. Jennifer Walsh, my mother's tennis partner. Her face went white as parchment. "Deborah," she whispered, looking around frantically. "But how are you?" "Good behavior," I said pleasantly. "Amazing what you can accomplish when you're motivated." She backed away as if I were contagious, already reaching for her phone. Perfect. Let the whispers begin. I made my way through the crowd, watching recognition ripple outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Conversations stuttered to a halt. Champagne flutes paused halfway to lips. The carefully orchestrated symphony of social graces struck a discordant note. By the time I reached the main floor, my parents were standing near the podium, accepting congratulations from Mayor Davidson. My mother wore sapphire blue diamonds at her throat that cost more than most people's homes. My father looked distinguished in his tuxedo, every inch the successful businessman. Jake stood to their left with Victoria, who clutched her clutch purse like a weapon. She knew something was wrong, but not what. Marcus Webb lingered nearby, sweating despite the air conditioning. The mayor was mid-sentence when he spotted me. His political smile froze, then melted into confusion. My mother followed his gaze, and time stopped. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers in slow motion, crystal shattering against marble in a crescendo that silenced the room. My father's face cycled through emotions: confusion, recognition, rage, and finally fear. But it was Jake's reaction I savored. The color drained from his face so completely I thought he might faint. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, a fish drowning in air. "Hello, Mother," I said into the perfect silence. "Father, Jake, lovely party." Security started moving, but I raised a hand. "I wouldn't. I'm an invited guest." I produced the invitation Sarah Mitchell had received. "Unless you want to explain to everyone why you're throwing out a legitimate attendee," my father found his voice first. "You're supposed to be in prison, yes, for 3 more years. But the federal system rewards good behavior, and I was very, very good." My mother swayed on her feet. "How dare you come here? How dare I?" I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut. "I'm not the one who sent an innocent daughter to prison. I'm not the one who built an empire on lies and stolen money." "You need to leave." Jake stepped forward, trying to regain control. "Now. Actually, I'm exactly where I need to be." I checked my watch. 8:55. In 5 minutes, some very interesting documents will be sent to every major news outlet in the Bay Area. Emails, financial records, recorded conversations, including one where you brag about framing me, Jake. His face went from pale to gray. "You're lying." "Am I? Should we discuss the Cayman accounts? The bribes to Commissioner Huang? The fact that Stanley Morrison's death wasn't an accident?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Commissioner Huang, standing near the bar, looked ready to bolt. I smiled at her. "Don't bother running, Patricia. You're wearing a wire, remember, part of your deal with the FBI?" Chaos erupted. Huang tried to deny it, but federal agents were already moving through the crowd, having shed their executive disguises. Senator Torres was backing toward the exit, only to find it blocked. Judge Harrison sat heavily in a chair, head in his hands. "You can't prove anything," Jake snarled, desperation making him reckless. "You're a convicted felon. No one will believe." "Connor," I called out, "would you like to share what you gave the FBI yesterday?" Connor Whitman emerged from the crowd, looking like a man walking to his execution. "I'm sorry, William," he said to my father. "They had recordings from 7 years ago. You knew Jake framed her and you covered it up. My mother's wail cut through the ballroom like a knife. She collapsed into a chair, pills scattering from her open purse. Several yellow capsules rolled across the floor, each one stamped with illegal pharmacy markings. "Oh, Margaret," I said with mock sympathy. "Dr. Crane was arrested this afternoon. The DEA found some very interesting records about your prescriptions. Multiple identities, volume indicating distribution. That's trafficking, mother." My father lunged at me, but security intercepted him. Not my security, the FBI's. They'd been waiting for this moment as carefully as I had. "You destroyed us," he growled. "No," I corrected. "You destroyed yourselves. I just made sure everyone could see it." 9 p.m. arrived with the chime of the country club's grandfather clock. Across the city, journalists' phones buzzed with the massive data dump Carmen had orchestrated. Financial records showing millions in embezzlement. Emails detailing bribes and corruption. Recordings of my family casually discussing their crimes. But the masterpiece was the confession found in Jake's office safe that afternoon. Every news outlet led with it. Mitchell Construction's CEO confesses to framing sister building empire on corruption. Jake's phone rang incessantly. He finally answered, his face growing more ashen with each word. Victoria watched him with satisfaction that matched my own. "That was the office," he said numbly. "The FBI is seizing everything. Computers, files, everything. Including the records of your affairs," Victoria added sweetly. "By the way, darling, I filed for divorce this morning. My attorney says the prenup is void due to fraud. Funny how that works." Marcus Webb tried to slip away but walked directly into federal agents. "Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and money laundering." Similar scenes played out across the ballroom. Corrupt officials were arrested or detained for questioning. Those not directly involved distanced themselves from my family as if corruption were contagious. Local news crews arrived with shocking speed, almost as if someone had tipped them off. They set up outside, capturing every arrested official, every shameful exit. The story was too good to miss. San Francisco's Golden family exposed as criminals at their own charity gala. "You planned this," my mother whispered, mascara streaming down her cheeks. "All of it. For 7 years." I confirmed. Every detail, every revelation. "Did you think I spent prison crying in my cell? I spent it learning from women who'd forgotten more about crime than Jake ever knew. I spent it planning this exact moment." My father looked older than his years, defeat etched in every line. "The company is finished. The FBI will freeze all accounts within the hour. The contracts will be canceled. The building will be seized as proceeds of crime. You'll lose everything, including our home, especially your home, built with stolen money on land bought with bribes." I paused, savoring the moment. "Though I doubt you'll need it where you're going." The FBI chose that moment to act. "William Mitchell, you're under arrest for money laundering, conspiracy, and racketeering. Margaret Mitchell, you're under arrest for drug trafficking and conspiracy. Jake Mitchell, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and murder in connection with Stanley Morrison's death." Murder. The word hung in the air like a death knell. Jake's legs gave out. Victoria stepped away from him in disgust. As they handcuffed my family, I noticed Brooke near the terrace doors. She raised her champagne glass slightly in acknowledgement. She'd provided crucial evidence and would walk away clean, already planning her fresh start with the money I'd ensured she'd receive. The ballroom emptied as agents escorted criminals away, and guests fled association with the toxic Mitchell name. Soon only a handful of people remained, including Aunt Ruth, who'd watched from the sidelines. She approached carefully as if I might bite. "Was it worth it?" she asked. "Becoming like them to destroy them?" I considered the question. 7 years of my life gone. My innocence shattered. My family obliterated. But they'd chosen this path when they'd chosen money over truth, reputation over justice. "They didn't just send me to prison," I told Ruth. "They killed who I was, the trusting girl who believed in family and justice and truth. She died in that courtroom 7 years ago. And who are you now?" I looked around the destroyed remnants of my family's empire. "I'm their reckoning. The consequence they never thought would come." The next hours blurred together. I gave my statement to the FBI, providing additional evidence I'd held in reserve. Journalists clamored for interviews, but I declined all but one. Sandra Liu from the Chronicle had covered my original trial, one of the few who'd questioned the rush to judgment. She deserved the exclusive. By midnight, the country club was empty except for staff cleaning up the detritus of shattered lives. I stood on the terrace where I'd played as a child during similar events, looking out over the lights of the city my family no longer owned. My phone buzzed with messages from Carmen and Letitia congratulating me on flawless execution. The stolen money had been returned to its rightful accounts. Evidence packages had been delivered to ensure convictions. The plan had worked perfectly, but standing there in my red dress, triumph tasted different than I'd imagined during those long prison nights. It wasn't sweet or satisfying. It was just complete. A closed circle. Justice served ice cold exactly as Letitia had promised. Ms. Mitchell. I turned to find a young FBI agent, probably fresh from Quantico. Yes, we'll need you to testify at the trials. I'll be there. He hesitated. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. What they did to you, no one deserves that. Especially from family. No, I agreed. They don't. As I left the country club for the last time, I passed the model of the pediatric wing that would never be built. A monument to false charity like everything else my family had touched. Tomorrow, the building would bear crime scene tape instead of ribbons. The Mitchell name would become synonymous with corruption instead of construction. I'd won. They'd created a monster when they'd caged an innocent girl, and tonight that monster had devoured them whole. The balance had shifted just as I'd promised myself it would through 7 years of concrete and steel. But monsters don't get happy endings. They just get endings. And as I drove away from the ruins of my past, I wondered if that would be enough. 3 months later, I sat in the federal courthouse where my journey through hell had begun. This time I was in the gallery watching my family face justice. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were being tried in a building their company had renovated with stolen funds. My father looked diminished in his orange jumpsuit, the powerful businessman reduced to federal inmate, number 89734A. Gone was the commanding presence, the iron certainty that had condemned his innocent daughter. His attorney argued for leniency, citing his age, his previous contributions to society, the manipulation by his son. The judge, a woman with no connections to our family, was unmoved. Mr. Mitchell, you didn't just participate in financial crimes. You chose money over your own daughter's innocence. You knew she was innocent for years and stayed silent. That moral bankruptcy exceeds any monetary theft. 15 years. The gavel fell like thunder. My mother's trial was harder to watch. The pills had been her escape from guilt, but the law saw only distribution quantities. Her attorney painted her as a victim manipulated by her husband and son, driven to addiction by circumstances. Mrs. Mitchell. The judge said, "You stood in this very court and testified against your innocent daughter. You chose to believe lies because the truth was inconvenient. Your addiction may explain your choices, but it doesn't excuse them." 5 years with mandatory rehabilitation. Jake's trial was the main event. The federal prosecutor, a brilliant woman named Patricia Chen, methodically destroyed every defense. The embezzlement, the bribes, the frame-up, and finally Stanley Morrison's murder. Security footage from a traffic camera showed Jake's car following Stanley the night he died. Phone records placed them together an hour before the crash. A mechanic testified that Stanley's brake lines had been expertly severed. Jake took the stand against his attorney's advice, still believing he could charm his way to freedom. But federal prison had taught me to recognize desperation, and Jake reeked of it. I was protecting the family business, he insisted. Deborah was always jealous, always trying to undermine me. I had to act first. "So you framed your innocent sister?" Chen asked. "She wasn't innocent," Jake exploded. "She was going to destroy everything our parents built. By exposing your crimes," he realized his mistake too late. The jury saw him clearly, a man who'd rewritten history to justify his actions, who'd convinced himself that preventing exposure of his theft justified any betrayal. 25 years. He'd be past 70 when he got out if he lived that long. Federal prison isn't kind to those who've betrayed family. Connor Whitman pled guilty to avoid trial, receiving 10 years for his role in the conspiracy. Commissioner Huang got 8 years. Senator Torres, 12. Judge Harrison was removed from the bench and faced separate criminal charges. One by one, every corrupt official in my family's network fell. The trials made national news. The Mitchell scandal: how one woman's quest for justice exposed a criminal empire. I declined most interview requests but agreed to a documentary that would donate proceeds to programs helping wrongfully convicted prisoners. With my tormentors facing justice, I focused on building something from the ashes. Using the forensic skills I'd honed in prison and the connections I'd made since release, I founded Phoenix Investigations, a firm specializing in uncovering corporate fraud and helping the wrongfully accused. Carmen joined as my partner, bringing decades of experience and a network of contacts. Letitia handled our digital forensics, her skills legendary in certain circles. Even Jade, the con artist who'd taught me about human psychology, joined as a consultant, her ability to read people invaluable in investigations. We took cases others wouldn't touch. A teacher fired for reporting administrative theft. A small business owner framed by a competitor. A widow whose husband's death looked suspiciously like Stanley Morrison's. Each victory felt like redemption, not just for our clients, but for the parts of ourselves the system had tried to destroy. 6 months after the trials, Aunt Ruth invited me to lunch. We met at a quiet cafe in Berkeley, away from the city that held so many poisoned memories. "How are you?" she asked, studying my face with concern. "I'm adjusting," I admitted. Revenge consumed me for so long, I'm still learning who I am without it. "Any regrets?" I thought about it. No, they made their choices. But I do wonder sometimes if I'd had different parents, who might I have been? "You can still be anyone you want," Ruth said gently. "You're only 35. You have decades ahead." She was right, but the future felt abstract after years of living for a single goal. I'd achieved perfect revenge, but what came after perfect? How did you build a life on foundations of justified destruction? The answer came gradually. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Patricia Wong, who specialized in trauma from wrongful conviction. She helped me understand that my anger, while justified, didn't have to define me forever. "You survived by becoming what they forced you to become," she explained. "But survival mode isn't living. It's time to choose who you want to be." I chose to be useful. Phoenix Investigations grew, taking on bigger cases, exposing more corruption. We hired other former inmates, women who'd been dismissed by society but possessed skills that traditional investigators lacked. Our success rate was phenomenal because we understood how criminals thought, having lived among them. A year after the trials, William Chen walked into our office. He was the federal prosecutor who'd handled Jake's case, tall and serious with eyes that missed nothing. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, "I have a proposition." Over coffee, he explained. The FBI needed consultants who understood both sides of financial crime. People who could think like criminals while working for justice. My unique background made me perfect for the role. "You want to hire an ex-convict?" I asked. "I want to hire someone who survived 7 years of wrongful imprisonment and brought down a criminal empire," he corrected. "Your record's being reviewed for expungement given the circumstances. But even if it wasn't, your skills speak for themselves." I accepted. Working with federal law enforcement felt like coming full circle, using everything prison had taught me to prevent others from suffering similar injustices. William and I worked well together, our professional relationship built on mutual respect for each other's expertise. 18 months after the gala that destroyed my family, something unexpected happened. My mother requested a visit from federal prison. I almost refused, but Ruth convinced me to hear her out. The visiting room at Dublin FCI was painfully familiar, though being on the other side of the glass felt surreal. My mother looked older, frailer, but clearer-eyed than she'd been in years. Prison-mandated sobriety had stripped away her pharmaceutical armor. Deborah, she said my name, catching in her throat. Margaret, I replied, refusing to call her mother. Her face crumpled, but she pressed on. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. What we did to you was unforgivable. Then why ask? Because I need you to know that I know. I've had 18 months to face what I refused to see for 7 years. You were my daughter, and I chose comfort over truth. I chose Jake because believing him was easier than believing you. When did you know? I asked the question that had haunted me. When did you realize I was innocent? She closed her eyes. 3 years into your sentence. Jake got drunk at Christmas, started talking about how well the frame had worked. Your father and I, we couldn't face it. We'd already testified against you, sent you away. Admitting the truth meant admitting we were monsters. You were monsters, I said flatly. Yes, she whispered. We were. Are. I dream about you every night. The little girl who used to help me garden, who baked cookies for her father's workers, who trusted us completely. We killed her. Yes, I agreed. You did. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then she asked, is there any part of her left? Any part that could someday forgive a mother who chose wrong? I thought about the question seriously. I don't know. The daughter who loved you is gone. But maybe someday the woman I'm becoming might find room for something other than anger. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe never. But perhaps understanding. It was more than she deserved, but less than she hoped. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll take whatever you can give. Even if it's nothing. I left without promises, but something in my chest felt lighter. Not forgiveness, but the possibility that hatred didn't have to be permanent. That maybe healing meant letting go of anger, not for them, but for myself. My father sent one letter, which I returned unopened. Jake sent dozens, increasingly desperate missives proclaiming his innocence, blaming everyone but himself. Those went straight to the shredder. Some bridges deserved to stay burned. 2 years after my revenge, Phoenix Investigations had become one of the most respected firms in corporate fraud investigation. We'd exposed corruption in dozens of companies, recovered millions in stolen funds, and helped 17 wrongfully convicted people prove their innocence. William Chen and I had grown closer, our professional relationship evolving into something more personal. He understood my darkness because he'd seen humanity's worst in his profession. He didn't try to fix me or pretend the past hadn't happened. He simply accepted who I was while encouraging who I was becoming. You know what I admire most about you, he said one evening over dinner. You had every reason to become truly evil. 7 years of injustice, betrayal by everyone who should have protected you. Most people would have come out wanting to burn the whole world. I did burn my world, I reminded him. No, he corrected. You burned the corruption. You exposed the lies. But you didn't become them. You use what you learned to help others. That's not revenge, Deborah. That's justice. The distinction mattered more than I'd expected. I'd spent so long focused on revenge that I'd missed my own transformation. Yes, prison had hardened me, taught me skills I'd never wanted to learn. But I'd chosen how to use those skills. I'd chosen to build rather than just destroy. The night of the 3rd anniversary of the gala, I stood in my office looking out over San Francisco. The Mitchell Construction Building was gone, demolished after being seized as criminal proceeds. In its place rose a community center funded by recovered assets from corporate fraud cases. Carmen joined me at the window. Any regrets? She asked, echoing Ruth's question from years before. No, I said and meant it. They created who I am when they sent an innocent girl to prison. Maybe that girl would have lived a quieter life, a happier one. But she couldn't have helped the people we've helped. She couldn't have built what we've built. Phoenix rising from the ashes, Carmen mused. A bit on the nose for a company name, don't you think? I smiled, the expression still feeling foreign, but less forced than before. Sometimes the obvious choice is the right one. My phone buzzed with a new case. Another corporation hiding crimes behind respectability. Another innocent person needing help, navigating a system designed to crush them. I'd been where they were condemned by lies and abandoned by those who should have protected me. Now I could be the help I desperately needed 7 years ago. Prison had taught me to survive, but survival was just the beginning. The real victory was in transformation, in taking the worst thing that ever happened to me and forging it into purpose. My family had taught me that blood meant nothing when self-interest was involved. But my chosen family, Carmen Letitia, Ruth William, and the growing team at Phoenix Investigations taught me that loyalty could be earned, trust could be rebuilt, and justice, while sometimes delayed, didn't have to be denied. The girl who'd walked into federal prison was gone, but the woman who'd emerged was exactly who the world needed her to be. My parents had sent me to prison over a lie. They'd created their own destroyer, their own judgment, their own ending. But I'd created something too, a future built on the ashes of injustice, a purpose forged in the fires of betrayal. They'd given me 7 years of hell. I'd turned it into a lifetime of meaning. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the making of you. Sometimes destruction is just another word for transformation. And sometimes, just sometimes, the balance doesn't just shift. It finds perfect equilibrium.